Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. So today it's a little hot outside, it's actually really hot outside, so I'm gonna have to make this video relatively short, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about kind of like double action pistols for the Airsoft model, the USP specifically, because if you follow the channel, most of the time on this channel we kind of talk about, like, in terms of pistols, it's always the Glocks, the GBB of my favorites basically, and I had my run with the HK, or the USP by Umarex, or VFC, well, I think it's Umarex, I can never get that right, with this model here. This is a full-size one right here, full-size model, 9mm model, gas blowback. You've probably already seen the review a while ago, and I wasn't a huge fan of it actually. I was kind of turned off by this once I got this. You can see that review down here if you want to see more about this with initial impressions. But today, or just as a recap, I remember at the time, well, actually let me back over a second. So since most of the model I deal with are really just like the Glocks, for example, as you can see, in the collection here, right, they're all Glocks, right, and for the most part, it's pretty simple. There's no like external hammer, and I'm be clear, I'm not an expert on this. I'm just a enthusiast, YouTube Airsoft enthusiast, right? But there's no external hammer, right? There's no external safety or anything like that, and so I've never really thought about the double action, right? And so in a normal model, like say for example, let's just call it the original Glock. Let's just say here's one here by WE. So here's a WE model right here, G19. Notice that the trigger's forward. Let me just recock it. Okay, so there you go. Now it's cycled. The hammer's locked back, or the internal's locked back, and notice the trigger position, right? It's empty. But if I were to pull the trigger and release the internal hammer, watch the trigger. There we go. It stays in the rest position, and that's it. And until it's, if there's another round, it would cycle and then it'll reset the trigger, right? And always hits this wall. It's always like that. Now, as a side note, it's not that important, but I've noticed that only for the lower generations, specifically the WE G17 Gen 3 or lower, I don't mean in terms of like when it was made, but just the generations. So the Gen 3 G17s by WE tend to not have that change in trigger. The trigger's always in the same place. So if you were to cock it like that and set the hammer, the trigger's in this position. If you were to pull it, notice how I let go, it goes back to the same position. It doesn't have that, it's not stuck in that position. But that's the same thing with the the Mauri G26, but not the G19 model, only with the G17 model. So it's kind of interesting to see what that is all about. But in a nutshell, what I was trying to get at is, though, for the most part, when you pull, here's a Elite Force model, right? It's supposed to look like this, but again, it has the same thing. It's cycled, right? Active, pull it, you hit that wall, pull it, trigger breaks, and there you go, and it stays there unless there's another round that cycles a slide or something like that. If you want to reset it, because I store it a certain way, I always kind of like pull it like that, just a little bit, but it doesn't actually cock the internal hammer. It just resets the trigger spring for this part. I think that's better for it. I don't know, and I don't know if this is more realistic or not. Or is this model more realistic right here, where when you pull it and you cock it, or you pull the trigger, it's supposed to reset? I'm not sure. Either way, that's not really what, I never thought about single or double action. It's always the same trigger pull. Now, when I got the USP right here by Umarex right here, this one does have a live fully loaded mag in it right here, right? And if you notice right here, I don't know if you can see, it's a little dark here, but the hammer, the internal hammer, is down right now. So that means in that video, when I made the original video reviewing this, I said that, hey, when you pull the trigger, nothing will happen, right? So if I put this magazine in, I pull the trigger, nothing happens, right? But if I were to pull this back and cock it, right, it's supposed to be in the active position, but the internal hammer hasn't changed. I don't think you can see it, but let's just trust me on that one, okay? The internal hammer isn't changed, right? So even though it appears like it's in the cocked position, if I pull it, nothing should happen, right? And nothing does. Now, that's different though when you actually cycle the slide and now the internal hammer is cocked back. So if I were to load this, you know, notice how the trigger has been changed now. So now it's in a very sensitive, or it's like a feather light trigger pull. So if you pull it, it hits the wall right here, and any more pressure and it will fire. A lot of folks don't feel safe carrying it that way, so they'll either put it on safe, but that could also be easily switched off. So what they include is a decocker in here, which they don't have for any of the Glock models. So you pull this down, and it puts it into this quote-unquote half-cocked position. And when it's in this half-cocked position, right, notice how the spring right there, that's now halfway cocked. It's not really half-cocked, because I think it's more like a third of the way decompressed. So it's not fully decompressed. But anyway, it shows that it's more, the pull now is not feather light anymore. It's really heavy, because you have to pull it all the way back and then push enough sufficient force to pull it back down before you can cycle it. So in a way, it's much safer to carry it this way. Now remember, there was I don't know, there wasn't a round in the chamber, I forgot. So even when I was saying, let me put a round in the chamber. Okay, so now there's a round in there. And if I were to pull it right now, obviously it's in its most easy to go fire off form right now. It's very sensitive, boom, it'll go, shoot, very light trigger pull. If I didn't feel like carrying that way, I would decock it. Again, there's still a round in there, and the internal hammer is still cocked, right? And this part is still cocked, right? And so to do so, the trigger pull is heavier, but you can still fire it if you pull it. See, there we go. So it's the same thing. And then the next shot will become single action, because that was double action, now this is single action. What's interesting though is that on the real USP, let me try to set this up again. On the real USP, from a security or from a safety standpoint, for a novice like myself, for example, they do not recommend that you release the hammer. They recommend you use this decocking lever to decock it, right? But they don't recommend is that what you'll see this in the movies where people pull the trigger while holding down on the hammer and slowly letting it ride forward, right? They don't recommend that because you can slip and it'll go off, right? So, but any case, let's say you were able to successfully, release the hammer and go ride it forward like this, right? If you were to, in this situation, if I were to manage to do that, and I try to pull the trigger, on this model, nothing would happen, right? Nothing happened. Even though there's still a round in the chamber and I pulled the trigger with a double action mode. In fact, it's probably more than double action right now. It's like, you have to pull even harder, but nothing would happen because the internal hammer was decocked. On the the Tokyo Marui compact model, there's nothing in the chamber right now. Okay, it's completely decocked. You can probably see that little silver hammer right now. That's in the decocked position internally. So it's completely decocked, and the hammer is, this model's a little bit different because it's a compact model, but you can see it's flushed with the slide. It's not poking out at the edge right there, but you definitely can't move anything. Now, what's interesting though is if you put this in, and let's assume there was a round in the chamber, right? If you pull the trigger, this will fire. It's a heavy pull, but it will still fire if there were actually a round in the chamber. In the Airsoft model, of course, as long as there's gas in the magazine, it will fire. So watch, right? Now it's much lighter. Next shot will be much lighter because it's now single action and the hammer's now cocked. Same function, you decock it to do that. So my question is, I guess, is this model more accurate than this model? Because if you were to have, it seems to me that the Tokyo Marui is a more accurate model of it. So to recap, let's say you know, you should never do this with a real model because it's kind of dangerous. But let's say there's a round in the chamber, right? You see the round in the chamber right there. Assume it's a real one, and you just had to do this whole risky thing where you let it go forward, but you successfully did it without slipping, and you were able to do without the round going off, right? The hammer is completely decocked now, right? So the question is, on a real model, if there was still that live round in the chamber, and if you pull the trigger as this double action mode where the trigger pull is really heavy, would that go off? Or is this more accurate right here, the VFC model, where again, I'm out right here, but oh, there's one round in the chamber, right? Let's say you successfully were able to decock it using the risky method and not using the decocker. You were to successfully decock it like so and not have the round internally go off, and then you were to pull the trigger, would this go off or not? In this model it doesn't go off, so but in this model it does. So the question is, who's more realistic? So let me know down below what you guys think in the comment. This is kind of a one-off video, I'm not sure. It's kind of just learning more and more about this as you know, you go back into the USP series and you have to kind of think more about single versus double action in this model. All right, thanks folks, hope you all had an interesting video and enjoyed the content a little bit. See you guys next time.